Phones on silent and avoid flash photography. Now for our next session, numbered 121 in your program sheets, All the Lives We Never Lived. It's a great privilege to introduce the speakers. Anuradha Roy is the author of an Atlas of Impossible Longing, The Folded Earth, and Sleeping on Jupiter, which won the DSC Prize for Fiction and was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize in 2015. She won the Economist Crossword Prize for The Folded Earth, which was also longlisted for the Man Asia Prize. An Atlas of Impossible Longing was picked as one of the best books of the year by Washington Post, Huffington Post, and Seattle Times. She is in conversation with Tishani Doshi, award-winning poet, novelist, and dancer. Her most recent work, Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods, is a powerful collection of poems that deals with coastal living, gender violence, memory, happiness, and aging. We await her forthcoming novel, Small Days and Nights. Please join me in giving a warm Jaipur Sunday morning welcome to both the speakers.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Can you hear me? Okay. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here in conversation with Anuradha Roy, who I think is one of our finest novelists writing today. All the Lives We Never Lived. We'll be talking about her new book, but also about certain themes that cross over into all her work. She published her first book, An Atlas of Impossible Longing, in 2008. And to prepare for this, I started reading all your books. And the thing that she does is she creates a very particular world. She's a beautiful writer of sentences, concerned with landscape, with nature. But all her characters have a kind of magnifying glass over them. And we see them with all their vulnerability, all their flaws, all their concerns, and you really want to cheer for them, particularly your women characters, but all of them. There is a great sense of grace as a writer that you have, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you about many things. Maybe we'll begin with a very simple question, which is how this book began. I remember you told me about Mishkin, that the book came through the character of a boy who loved painting so much that he thought he could enter them. And there's a beautiful line in the book where he describes taking the glasses off and all the colors swim. And as someone who's short-sighted myself, I've always thought that one of the beautiful things about being short-sighted is that you can choose to have the world in a blurry, impressionistic painting form or in a clear way. So tell us about Mishkin and how the book began.
That's a beautiful way to put short sight. Tishani is one of I am a huge admirer of Tishani's Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods, which really spoke to me very deeply. So I'm delighted to be doing this session with her. Thank you. How the book began, as Tishani said, was with this little boy called Mishkin, who is very intensely lonely, living a life very much of the imagination. And one of his aspects is that he has been abandoned as a 9-year-old by his mother, who writes him letters from the island of Bali, to which she has gone with an artist, a German artist called Walter Spies. And in these letters, she encloses pictures, feathers, leaves, all kinds of things, as well as paintings. She paints her surroundings. And as he looks at these paintings, he feels as if he is entering these paintings and living that life with her. It's very much a way of, for me, it is fiction, this parallel life that you live, where you enter a different world, and that is as real to you as your real world. Now, who was Walter Spies, and why is he the person with whom Gayatri, Mishkin's mother, ran away? Walter Spies was a real-life person. He was actually, I have a few pictures I wanted to show you. So could we have the slides, please? Walter Spies was born in a very wealthy German family, which had business interests in, does it start now? This is Walter Spies. You can immediately see, I know that half the reason why he is in my book is his love of animals. He has a cockatoo on his chair and a monkey in his hands. And when he was growing up in this quite aristocratic family in Russia, he had his pocket full of snakes and fish, which he would release at family dinner parties. He had dogs. There were, yeah. So those are his dogs, 2 of them. And there he is as a little boy. And Spies grew up in Russia, was imprisoned in a prison camp there. Then he came during the First World War. Then when he was released, he came to Germany, and he became a very prominent artist. He was an artist along with people like Paul Klee and Otto Dix. He was in the heart of art at that point, extremely successful, also collaborating in painting film sets. During this time, Nazism, this was the 20s, and it was on the rise in Germany. And he started to feel completely constrained and horrified by what he saw around him, although the very brutal part of it had not begun. So he decided to leave everything. He had heard of Bali. He went about it quite systematically. He sent money ahead and so on. And then he became a ship hand. He got onto a ship going to Java and worked his way to Java, got off at Java, and then some years later, for some years he worked in the Sultan's orchestra because he was very musical too. And some years later he went to Bali and fell in love with Bali. And this is one of his very famous paintings called The Landscape and Her Children, actually, The Landscape and Her Children, which I considered as a title for the book. I think it's a quite beautiful title for a painting. And he had these incredibly, if you look at the painting carefully, the same figure is repeated behind, and he has these lovely drops in perspective, a kind of mesmeric quality to most of his paintings. He also did other paintings which were like this, which he was doing for money, which illustrated life in Bali at the time. So this was the 1920s, and he was never get into PowerPoints. This is this is a portrait of a boy called Hamid. Walter Spies was gay. He had lovers in Bali, and ultimately he was imprisoned, and he was accused of pederasty, which was completely false according to everyone who knew him there. They couldn't find witnesses and so on, but this was probably one of his lovers. And this is Charlie Chaplin. Slowly, as he lived in Bali, it became a nucleus for all kinds of people like Margaret Mead, Charlie Chaplin, Beryl Dezoot, all to come. Beryl Dezoot was a dancer, to come and visit him there. That's Beryl Dezoot. She was a dancer and eurythmics instructor, and she wrote on dance. She also came to India. And she is one of the several historical characters in the book. Could you move? This is Margaret Mead. And this is Balinese dance, which Walter Spies wrote a great deal about, including a book with Beryl Dezoot. So it was a completely different world. Could we have the next slide, please? Now, this is partly why Walter Spies is in my book. The person you see in the middle in that patterned shawl is Rabindranath Tagore. And Rabindranath Tagore in 1927 went on a trip to Java and Bali and toured the whole place. He had an exhausting itinerary. Our JLF one does not compare. his advanced age, he was speaking almost every day. They were traveling by ship. And Tagore's reason for going on this tour was because Tagore was very definitely, he shared in common with Walter Spies the idea that the world, the idea that nationalism should not be a narrow kind of patriotism, that curiosity for the world outside was fundamental, and that a sense of humanity was far more important than any kind of narrow patriotism either. And the two of them were kindred souls who thought that this whole rise of Nazism at that time was really a manifestation of nationalism gone toxic and wrong. So there was Tagore, he reaches Bali, and who is his guide but Walter Spies? And Walter Spies wants to be his guide because he wants to come to India. He has a great facility for languages. He's interested in Indian dance. So he wants to come to India in order to learn dance and write about it. But in 1942, Spies is a German in Dutch-held Bali. He becomes interned during the war, and he is taken away on a ship to Dehradun. The ship is bombed near Sumatra, and he sinks with it and dies. Now, in my book, Tagore is on this ship called the Amboaz, which is leaving Madras for Singapore, and then will go on to various destinations, ending for a long time in Bali. And on this ship is Gayatri, who is the mother of my child boy in the book Mishkin. And Gayatri is a fictional character who really wants to learn art in Shantiniketan, who worships the art of Tagore, and whose father is an extraordinarily enlightened man for the 20s, who sees a spark of some kind in his daughter and wants to take her and expose her to the art. Can we have the next slide, please? And culture of the world. So here is Tagore in Borobudur, and he's the one right at the distance there. And Gayatri meets Tagore. Because of Tagore, she meets Spies. And in the book, she comes back. Her father dies shortly afterwards, and she is married off to a man who is a good man, but very much a patriot and a patriarch in the Gandhian mold, who will give his wife freedom if it is for India's freedom, that is to go on marches and so on, but not to paint or dance. These are the things she wants to do. And the marriage breaks up. At this point, Spies, in an imaginary journey, has come to India, and she leaves for Bali with him. I don't know. Can we just go forward? This is actually Spies' house in Ubud. You may have seen it. We both have been there for a book festival. Writing books has advantages, I can tell you that. So this is Spies' house, that chest. And this is, okay, go to the next. This is Mount Agung in a northern hilly part of Bali. So as Spies was living in Ubud, and Charlie Chaplin and Tagore and the whole world was coming, he was experiencing what some of us currently are in Jaipur, where you feel, yes, you want to meet every one of our other writers and poets and colleagues, but you need to retreat into a quiet space to actually write. So Spies went off to live in front of Mount Agung, and the house is still there. It's now a tiny and exquisite hotel. And this is where Gayatri and Spies spend time together, not as lovers, but as artists working together.
You have, Anuradha, an extraordinary first sentence. Could you just read maybe, I don't know, the first page of the book? Because in a way, you tell us immediately what the story is. With that first line, you kind of give it away, but of course you have so many tricks up your sleeve as the fine novelist that you are.
In my childhood, I was known as the boy whose mother had run off with an Englishman. The man was in fact German, but in small-town India in those days, all white foreigners were largely thought of as British. This unconcern for accuracy annoyed my scholarly father, even in circumstances as dire as losing his wife to another man.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's immediately compelling to understand that these are the issues of the story, that this man is going to be looking back at his life, his childhood, but he's dealing with this abandonment and this disappearance that kind of mars his life in a very profound way. Mm-hmm. Why did you decide to begin the story there?
I did it because I wanted the story to be about the why and not the whether, if you know what I mean. I didn't want it to be about, so what will happen next? Will she leave or won't she leave? So I wanted to get that aspect of it actually done in the beginning, as you do. When I was going to integrate Walter Spies into this book, I realized he is a great tragic figure. He is one of these archetypal tragic figures because here was a man who was a genius, and he has to be in prison many times and die at 42. So for me, the way to structure the book was to structure it as a tragedy, where we know the almost the worst thing that will happen in the book is told to you right at the start, so that as a reader, you are interested in finding out why it happened and what the ripple effects of it were.
And I think also the quality of gossip is very different when you live in a small town. Yeah. And the small town is something that you have really made your speciality in a way. In all of your books, you have a seaside town, you have a mountain town, you have a village outside in Bengal. These are, as you've said, I think in an interview, not gentle places. Mm-hmm. When we think of the idyllic, and I'm very interested in the small myself because for the last 8 years I've been living in a village basically, and it's a very curious way of life. So could you tell us what it is about the small town that appeals to you as a fiction writer, and why you have sometimes, like you've written about Ranikhet, which is where you live, but sometimes you also make up the town, as in this book with Muntazir.
Yeah. This book has a town in it called Muntazir, which in Urdu means waiting for someone impatiently. And I chose the name Muntazir because in my mind, this town is one of those towns like Rampur or Lucknow, which was once great and after colonization has become something else. It is a town which is near Dehradun because there is a train that passes through this town taking prisoners to the internment camp, World War II internment camp in Dehradun. And the reason for creating my towns, partly it is really because I'm creating all my characters. I want to create my own town as well. It is part of the fictional world that I want to make. And the reason that they are small is that I feel, if you've read The Idiot, Dostoevsky's The Idiot, after whom Mishkin is named, incidentally, in that, many of the really passionate and raging scenes take place in a tiny little place, not in Moscow, where quite a bit of the book takes place, but it's a tiny place called Pavlovsk, I think. And within Pavlovsk, they're mainly in one house and a bench in the park where they have trysts. And I feel that this kind of small setting allows what the emotional drama, the intellectual drama of the book to become much bigger and much more vivid than to drown it in the noise of Bombay and Delhi. The big city novels other people do, like the novels, I'm thinking of that cricket novel, The Netherland, set in New York, which talked about 9/11 very beautifully through cricket, set in New York. Those do it beautifully, but I have an instinctive, also personal love of small towns, maybe because I've always lived in them on the whole.
Yeah. Let's talk about the idea of motherhood versus nationhood. You mentioned that in your introduction, or the equating of motherhood and nationhood. You've written some amazing women characters, and Gayatri, I think, is such a strong personality. She's indulged by her father. She's allowed to be this independent spirit. But of course, when the father dies, she kind of loses that in a way, and she has to conform to certain things. And in the end, she decides to make it and go for this her freedom. Tell me a little bit about why you wanted to explore this idea, because you went from Sleepy on Jupiter, which was also looking at issues, violence, pedophilia, certain issues very, very strongly. And this is moving it in a different direction, but I think equally fascinating, the idea of motherhood and our expectations of it.
Yes, because Gayatri is not the typical mother. She is actually fiercely and passionately devoted to her child, but she is equally devoted to her painting. And she confesses at some point when she has left her child. She is torn. She is not uncomplicated. It's not always easy to like her, and yet we like her because I do. Because there are these, we are often so torn. There are so many conflicts within us continuously. And Gayatri wants to there is a Hindi poem by Ghalib. He says, Raat bhi, neend bhi, kahani bhi. Which is that you want the night, you want your sleep, but you also want to read a story at night. So for Gayatri, these choices become intensely difficult. For her, it is not possible to work, to paint, to live the life she wants to live if she is with her husband. And therefore, she has to leave. Can I read a little bit? Yeah. I'll just read you a tiny portion. On cue, there is a child in the audience who is, as if he says, okay, mother, you do your job. I did not understand at the time what a catastrophic disgrace my mother's disappearance was for my father. This is just after she's left. It was not as if she had broken out of the family to go on marches for freedom, which would land her gloriously martyred in jail. Why would my father have bothered with that? He would have celebrated it as a belated vindication of the ways of thinking to which he had tried converting my mother without success all these years. Had my father ever denied my mother anything? Other women veiled their faces and served their husbands and embroidered and knitted. She had to do none of these things. My mother had the liberty to do whatever she wanted, go where she pleased, wear what she wished, within reason. Yet, even in his darkest hour, the irony of my mother's freedom cannot have escaped my father. He always looked truth in the face, however hard its glare hurt his eyes. He knew then, as I was to realize later, that each of her little liberties depended on his acquiescence. She had felt stifled, and she had broken free. She had not chosen the austerity and sacrifice of the fight for the common cause. She had fallen instead as low as a woman could. She had left her child and husband for a lover, a foreigner. Poisonous whispers rustled in my father's wake wherever he went. He turned into a recluse, and our home became an echo chamber. Many years later, when I was clearing out my father's things after his death, I found a letter from my mother tucked into the back of the hidden drawer in his cedarwood desk. The paper smelt of old resin and felt as thin and brittle as a peeled-off scab. There was no date. I am not coming back. I am telling you this only so that you don't worry about me. Do not try to find and stop me, please. I am 26. Life is running away from me. I want more. There are things that we cannot fight, however hard we try. I have failed you and failed my child. Forgive me if you can. The letter was melodramatic enough, but as if something concrete were needed to emphasize the brutal enormity of what she was doing, or maybe just to carry out the threat she had made a few months before. My mother had chopped off her long hair and left it with the letter in a cotton bag. I ran my fingers through the hair in the bag, rough, dull, repulsive. It was nothing like the perfumed silk that had brushed against my face on that last morning when she kissed me goodbye on the veranda steps. So she certainly is, made to, so thank you. This is not a mother who many people find easy to like. I have been getting a fair number of letters, emails and so on, saying, even yesterday from a friend, saying, I just cannot accept what she has done to her child. But these are real and difficult choices. Life is not easy. It is not uncomplicated.
Yes,
women have to make more of these difficult. Why is it a choice? It shouldn't be a choice.
I was going to ask you whether you had that, because obviously the situation has changed now where one feels that you can do everything. But in the historical context of the novel, it's certainly, there were fewer choices and fewer freedoms. I want to talk a little bit about this idea of working with history, because having read your previous novels as well, in The Folded Earth, and the idea of letters, I really feel, for me personally, letters are one of the most beautiful literary forms, and I feel, incredibly sad that we don't write them anymore. But in The Folded Earth, you had, as a historical peg, the letters of Edwina and Nehru, which are sort of, nobody knows whether this man has them or no, but that's his source of pride and fame, and at the end of the book we find out. And in this book, you have this interaction with these real, figures like Spies, like Tagore, like Begum Akhtar, and then you have these fictionalized characters. So as a person who's creating a universe of your own, talk to us a little bit about the importance of history and the weight of it, and how you negotiate as you try to make your own novel.
I think there are two kinds of historical novels. One is the kind of historical novel that Amitav Ghosh would write, that Hilary Mantel writes, which are true to the sequence of the events and yet and try to bring that world alive. With me, if you've read this absolutely wonderful writer called Robert Z. Toller, have you read it? He's written a book called A Whole Life, which I think everyone should read. But his other book is The Tobacconist, in which an Austrian village boy, just when the war is about to happen, he's left his Austrian village, gone to Vienna, he's working at a tobacconist's, and Freud keeps visiting this tobacconist for his tobacco, for his cigars. The boy meets Freud, and the two of them try to understand the horrifying things that are happening around them. Because suddenly neighbors are attacking neighbors. The tobacconist is Jewish, his shop is vandalized. And of course, there is no boy who has met Freud, none that we know of this kind. But in my book, as in The Tobacconist, fiction and history have boundaries that are quite permeable. And things happen that didn't happen, but that could have happened in this space which we create, which is fiction. And for me, the important thing is that I will be true to the history, to these people. So actually the book has a kind of concert of voices. When Spies actually speaks in the book. When Beryl de Zoot speaks in... Beryl was a wonderfully witty character. Every sentence she spoke, when you read up for researching her life, you feel like making up a whole book of quotes. But what I did was when I was introducing they have speaking lines and dialogue, I tried to take from their essays, their letters, and their dialogue is actually their words. Also, the book has translations from the work of Moitre Devi, a Bengali novelist who actually fell in love with Mircea Eliade, a Romanian, when in the 1930s in Calcutta. That actually happened. And she has great similarities with my Gayatri. And apart from her, there is Percy Lancaster, a gardener who had written a great deal about gardens and trees. So I had to somehow get in all their voices. I decided to be true to their voices rather than to the happenings in their life, and to stitch the book together as a concert of these voices without any of the seams showing, and yet the whole world of the 30s coming alive.
Yeah. Is this board bothering people?
Yeah,
here?
it is bothering
Can we
me.
just move it? Because I saw a groan going in the audience when it came back. Can we just move it to the side? Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Maybe... oh, sorry.
Okay.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit as well about the idea of nationalism, which is something that comes through the book. And you know, history is always teaching us the same lessons that we refuse to learn. Yeah. And so one of the marvelous things about All the Lives We Never Lived is reading it, you understand that we are back in a cycle of trying to understand what this narrow patriotism means. Nek Chand, who is the husband, is a kind of endearing but doltish character, because he's insisting on this one path and he's not able to appreciate his wife's sort of larger vision. And I think we talked about this earlier, about Tagore and, you know, about the insistence of beauty and of this whole bohemian lifestyle, which seems to be quite far, and the idea of even of cosmopolitanism, like in the way that you describe how these people were living and what they were doing. It feels very distant from our times, even though we are so connected.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when I was reading, there's a wonderful journal that one of the travelers with Tagore kept. And when you read that journal, you see, maybe it has to do with ships and letters as well. The travel was happening at a completely different pace. And it was really travel. It was not just seeing the sights and moving on. There was a great engagement with the actual language, culture, art of the places. And for Tagore, why did Tagore travel so much? It was genuinely because he was curious. He loved his country. In fact, he gave up his knighthood because of colonial atrocities in India. But he refused to think of India as the best thing that ever happened. He thought there was a lot in the world and you had to know the world, and therefore you had to travel. He conceived Shantiniketan as a place which would be a nest for the world. That's how he described it. So the question of freedom for Tagore was a different one than it was for people looking to free themselves from colonialism alone. He said he thought there were many other kinds of freedom, and one of the most important was the freedom of the mind. And this is actually a very difficult question, and there is a Spanish novelist, Javier Cercas, who wrote a book called The Blind Spot, in which he talks about what does a novel do. And he says ultimately a novel has to ask a question. And in a clear or unclear way, it has to find its way to the answer to that question. But ultimately, in a good novel, you find that the answer is that there is no answer. And it's the job of the work to make you ask questions. And Cercas also said another thing, which was, he was actually quoting Faulkner. And Faulkner said that the role of fiction or literature itself is to light a match in the middle of complete darkness. And the light of one match may not show you anything in that darkness, but what the match light does show you is that there is this darkness. So I thought that my novel, in drawing parallels between these horrifying things that happened in the 30s and 40s, would light a match now to show the darkness that is around us at this time, and to show us that although we as individuals might think our lives are safe, we will go on doing what we will go on doing, you can see from the book that all these people had their lives absolutely overthrown by the forces of history.
Can I ask, have you lost a house in your life, like a very important house?
Yes, I have. My old house in Calcutta had to be knocked down because of the reasons such things happen, and it still exists as a kind of ghostly house in my mind.
Because when I read your work, there is this devotion to the house as a place, and you begin your first novel with this house that is disappearing in the flood, and there's always this threat. Yeah. In this book, of course, there's a disappearance of mother, which is in a way the idea of home and safety. And in all of your books, there is, either even if it's a hostel or a hotel or the house itself, it's such an important part of the book. The house is, in fact, a character. Yeah. So it comes from this house?
Well, partly I think, I often think that, there is a part in that book which you're talking about, An Atlas of Impossible Longing, where the man goes back to an apartment building. That is what has become, he's a contractor. He is the one who's knocked down the old building and put an apartment there. And he says that he can see ghosts everywhere in that brand new apartment building. He can see ghosts in the elevators and in the shiny marble toilets. Mm-hmm. And to me, the houses really are places where every bit of it has some kind of memory attached to it. And memories make us human too. And therefore, yes, they are very important.
I promised to ask you about dogs, and I'm going to ask you about dogs. So Anuradha and I have a very shared passion for dogs. At one point, I had about 16 dogs. Now I have 3. It's a more manageable number. And I also live in a small town outside of Chennai, and you live in Ranikhet with your 3 dogs now or more? 3.
There are 3. And when you asked the question about the houses,
yeah.
I was trying not to say that I really hate leaving home, because I can talk to my husband on the phone, but I can't talk to my dogs.
And so, for other dog enthusiasts in the audience, I'm sure there are many. You also have, all your books have dogs in them. Yep. And they're there in the sidelines of all the pages. They are characters like all the others. There is a sense of bringing a quality of humanity to the book with the dogs. And I want to know, what is it about dogs? Why are you obsessed with dogs?
I've
what
had
can
dogs.
They do for us?
Yeah.
I mean, we know, but I want you to talk about it, because I know, but I find it hard to explain,
Many people who like cats, and this always offends me, that no, I don't mean that people who like cats offend me, but people who like cats cultivate a slightly superior air of saying, oh, a cat does not ask for affection. A cat is so independent. A dog, that people have dogs because they want somehow to be having a fan in the house. It's not like that at all. I mean, I am my dog's absolute devotee and servant, and that's why I'm a sort of dog walker. No, I think that dogs, for me, when I'm in the house, I'm doing my work, my dog is there. It's a non-human non-human, essential non-humanness for me. The dog is something that is absolutely separate from every other thing I have to do. And the love that you feel when you look at your dog is, I simply can't describe, it's not possible to have it for any other human. And when I had my very first dog, and I hope my husband is not listening. I had my first dog when I was 7. My father had gone to Bhutan and he came back with this dog in his pocket. And I think my mother looked at it with some alarm, this moving pocket. And then 2 days later, the thought that maybe we are not cut out for dogs. But she stayed. She stayed till I was 21. Then another dog came. And all of them became for me also essential in one of my books is dedicated to one of them. They are in all the acknowledgements. But they are also in the books as sometimes in this, All the Lives We Never Lived, I promised I would do nothing bad to any animal. Because actually for me, I find in Sleeping on Jupiter, there is a very brutal scene with a dog, in which one of the characters beats up a dog very, very brutally. And for me, I know that it is almost a kind of signposting for myself. It is how I can tell, anyone who knows what I write will be able to tell that this guy is a baddie. He is beating a dog. So they function as a kind of moral compass within the books.
Yeah. I was very interested. I'm going to open it up soon, but I have just a few questions if I can try to squeeze in. One of the things that you do very well is, first of all, your characters are all very sensual. They are engaged with the natural world. They have desires. They want to touch. They're not sort of floating around, just thinking political things. And I love that about them, that they're these very real, rounded people. But I also love that they have these unlikely friendships. And so while there are, of course, romances and all of that, in your first book, you had your just wonderful, the old Bengali woman who strikes up a friendship with the Anglo-Indian woman across without speaking. And in The Folded Earth, you have Maya, who comes after her husband has died and strikes up a friendship with Diwan Saab, who's older man. And in this book, you have so many, even Gayatri and Walter Speed. So very soon, we find out that she's not run away with a lover, but that in fact, she's run away so that she can be free. And the sort of relationship between the grandfather and Lisa. And I'm very interested in these unlikely friendships and relationships and why you're drawn to charting them out.
I think it's really the way I think people are human at their best in these kinds of friendships that often happen in circumstances that are not obviously made for friendship. As you say in the first book, there is an old woman. She is on the edge of mental illness. She is cooped up and confined in a room. Across the road, there is an Anglo-Indian woman with whom she strikes up a completely wordless friendship. And there's something about that is beautiful about a friendship without words, and yet you communicate in a whole other way, and I feel that it makes it possible to think of different worlds. The whole of Sleeping on Jupiter to me is about friendship, because the little girl who is abused in Sleeping on Jupiter, Nomi, has a friend in the book called Piku, who again is unable to communicate except with Nomi because she is not well. And this to me was central. Everybody then says it's about love or it's about sexual abuse, but to me many of these books are really about people's ability to find common ground without even a language in common, and to find genuine, connections.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Okay, we'll take a few questions from the audience. Please make them concise and questions rather than comments. Yeah, there's a woman here in the front row. Also, that grandmother had a foul mouth,
Oh, yeah.
which was great. I mean, there's so many questions I haven't gotten around to asking, but your sense of humor, I love that it's sort of always there in all the books. Please.
Yeah. Hi. So I just wanted to ask, you had these real characters in your book, and then you had these fictional ones. But how do you define that the real ones, how do they react to the fictional setting of your story? And how true you keep the way they behave or, going forward with the story. So how you are able to do that? How truthful are you that this is how they would, react to a particular situation, and how do you define their characters so well? So you put in a fictional aspect to it in the real characters along with the story, like.
Okay.
I think
covered
what
it
you are asking is, what we spoke about a little earlier, which was that I tried to be absolutely true to the character, personality, spirit, and broadly the events in the lives of the historical characters. But then I'm interested in introducing the fictional ones in order to see what if, because fiction is all about what if. That's how, Tishani has a new book coming out next year, which is a novel. And I'm sure with her, it started with, what if there was a sister, a girl, who had to look after a differently abled sister? That's how it must have begun. And then you start off the whole construction of the world around it.
Yes, there's a woman here. Here. Yes.
Thank you. Following that, I'm wondering if you could speak a bit to the justice behind entering into a story that really happened in a world where we now have creative rights and things like that.
What is that?
The justice in a world where we have creative rights.
Are you, I'm sorry.
Sorry, could you clarify that question?
Certainly. So the way in which it is just to enter a story that wasn't your own or was not our own, that really happened, and to kind of take that on as your own. You spoke about the importance of being historically accurate, but I'm wondering specifically of, the right we have to embrace each other's stories.
Okay, yeah. Well, partly I think I feel safer because all of these people lived in the 20s and 30s. Their lives are well known, and the book makes it very clear in a fairly long afterword that a lot of it has been fictionalized. A lot of it is fiction. I mean, we are in the world of the novel. Everybody reading a novel knows that they are not reading a chronicle, they are not reading history. And people who need to really find out what Walter Spies was actually doing would, I think, be going to a history book. Whereas in my book, he is functioning as a fictional character who is based on a historical character. And I feel as if a novelist can sometimes imagine the world. I mean, Walter Spies may have said, "Oh, you made me go to India. That's very nice." I think of him as that. He became a very close and dear friend during the writing of the book. I didn't feel I was appropriating or falsifying his life because other sources exist for factual information on his life.
Preferably a non-history question. Yeah, gentleman back there.
So I'd like to know a little more about the process of your writing. You live in Ranikhet, as you said, with the dogs. So how do you go about organizing the process of going to the desk and,
It's very difficult because they think I exist for them rather than for any other thing. So I have to be, when you write, the first thing to know is that you have to be extremely disciplined. You have to know that this is work that you're doing, it's not for fun. You have to be absolutely regular. You have to get up early and get your day organized and give it that concentrated time. To carve out that time is sometimes quite difficult. So I consciously don't travel too much for literary events unless I have a new book out. I stay at home, I lead a very boring life, I walk my dogs, and I write my books. That's about it.
I have a quick question. We'll take one more from the audience. But I found it very endearing that last year you had put up some of the choicest criticisms on your Facebook page. And so my question is, Anuradha, when are you going to write a book about a delivery boy who lives in the suburbs of Calcutta?
I know. There was a review in Calcutta which didn't like the book at all. She complained from start to finish about the book and ended by saying, why do we have these, books set in the past? When will we have a book about a Swiggy delivery boy doing deliveries in Calcutta? And I really wanted to tell her, there are many books written about set in the present. There are books set in the past. You are reading a particular book. You need to judge a book within the what it's trying to do and not what it isn't.
Criticism is a tricky thing for all writers. Here, there's a man on the floor. Yes. Let's
Hello,
give the
ma'am.
mic.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, hi ma'am. Good morning. So I'm a technology guy. I'm just getting to connect with the literature with the lady here. I have two questions very quickly. The aspect that you wrote from you read from the book, which is about a lady who left. I just wanted to know that you said you got many mails that, she left and she wouldn't have done that. The first question is,
You won't ask me my email ID.
No, I will not. I'll figure it out. So the question is that any email or letter stating that a very courageous move or she did the right thing, question one. Second is, what is your personal opinion about the character you wrote? Whether that was the right thing or she should have looked for the public consequences or given importance to her private motives.
That's a really excellent and interesting question. Thank you. You said, were there any emails about admiring her instead? And yesterday, just yesterday, I was being interviewed by one of the newspapers from Nepal here. And the journalist was telling me all about someone she knew who she wished had done exactly what Gayatri does in the book. Because she said, although your book is set in the past and this woman I know lives in the present, she's a free spirit, just as Gayatri is, and she is being completely stifled where she lives. And there have been many women who've written to me, both after Sleeping on Jupiter and here, with this book, saying that they relate to Gayatri completely, because I think Gayatri represents quite a lot of the choices and dilemmas most women face in their lives. And what do I think of Gayatri myself? I really, she came onto the page. Some characters you struggle to write. You have to take them apart, put them right again, add things, this and that. With Gayatri, I felt as if I knew her completely. I am sure that I have felt many things that she has felt, even though the circumstances of my life have been the opposite, that I've never had to struggle to create a space for myself to do my own work. But choices are not literally similar. They can be similar in different ways. And so I feel a great kinship with Gayatri.
Yes, in the front row. Last question.
I would like to ask you, what is the influence of your mother and father on your writing? And how has that evolved? Because your mother comes from a very distinguished family and her life has been tough. Tell me more whether your books reflect in any way her thinking or you are planning a book which would have more of your mother's thinking in it.
I think that when you say that my mother's life has been tough, this is because my mother grew up in Jaipur. She is from here. She grew up in a very privileged and family of writers and people who worked in government or were doctors and so on. And from this, she married into a joint family in Calcutta. And had to struggle quite a bit to create her own space within that, because she paints, she also writes, and my great aunt Jyotirmoy Devi was a very well-known Bengali writer. And my mother then my father died when I was 19. And so my mother brought us up alone. And it was only when I became a lot older, when I was married myself, and when I turned the age that she was when my father died, all through those years, I came to understand what an intensely lonely struggle it is to be without your partner and to be bringing up 2 children and to fight for their freedom continuously. Because I think many of us who are younger women have really had to build our own freedom on the entrapment of older women. Sometimes we've been responsible for it ourselves because we have to go out to work, we expect our mother to be home and to look after the child or the home. We completely expect them to turn into childminders, baby carers, etc. Quite forgetting that, that they have their gifts too. So my mother comes into my work in many kinds of ways, and this book is actually dedicated to her because she inspires me in so many ways and gave me a little notebook when I was 6 years old and told me that I should write whatever came into my head. The book slowly filled up with stories, and I think the reason why I am here today, other than the literal reason of being given birth by her, is because of that book she gave me and the many other things she did.
And aren't we all glad that your mother gave you that notebook? Ladies and gentlemen, Anuradha Roy. Please give her a big round of applause.
Thank you. You've been a wonderful, wonderful audience. Thank you so much for coming.
She'll be signing books in the bookstore. Thank you so much.